The morning light slipped through the thin curtains of Daniel Reed's small apartment, streaking the walls with gold and dust. The alarm clock buzzed beside his bed, and he groaned, slamming a tired hand against it. Another day, another shift. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. The room was cluttered, a half-eaten sandwich on the nightstand, piles of unopened letters on the table, sketches of buildings curling at the corners from neglect. His life was a collage of half-finished dreams. Daniel had once imagined himself as an architect, designing towers that touched the clouds, bridges that connected more than just land. But dreams, he had learned, didn't pay the bills. Now, at 24, he worked as a cashier at a convenience store, counting coins and pretending not to care that his life had drifted off course. He walked to the bathroom and looked at his reflection. His eyes had lost their fire, replaced by the dull haze of resignation. He splashed cold water on his face, put on his uniform, and stepped into the chilly morning air. The city was waking up, engines growled, vendors shouted, and the world moved with purpose. Everyone seemed to be going somewhere important. Everyone except him. Daniel's route to work took him through the local park, a patch of green that stood stubbornly amidst the city's concrete sprawl. He rarely paid attention to it, it was just another place people passed through. But lately, something in that park caught his eye. An old man, always sitting on the same weathered bench by the fountain, feeding pigeons. He wore a faded brown coat and a calm, unbothered smile, as if the chaos of the city could not touch him. Daniel saw him every morning, and though they never spoke, the old man's presence was oddly comforting. There was something about him that felt steady, grounded, the way the world must feel to someone who has already seen everything it can offer. One morning, when Daniel's bus broke down, he decided to walk the rest of the way. As he passed the park, the old man looked up and smiled. It was a small, genuine smile that carried warmth without needing words. "Good morning," the man greeted. Daniel hesitated but replied, "Morning." He glanced at his watch, he was already late. But something about the man's calmness made him pause. "Late for work?" the man asked with a twinkle in his eye. "Yeah," Daniel sighed, stuffing his hands into his jacket pockets. "Not that it matters. It's just a job." The man tilted his head slightly. "Just a job? You sound like you've already given up on it." Daniel gave a tired laugh. "I guess I have. I'm just a cashier. Scan items, smile, and repeat. Nothing important." The man looked at him with quiet amusement. "Nothing important, you say? You help people every day, don't you?" "I wouldn't call it that," Daniel replied. "They buy chips and soda, I ring them up. That's it." The old man nodded thoughtfully. "You ever smile at them?" "Sometimes," Daniel shrugged. "Do you know," the man said gently, "that a simple smile can change the way someone sees their day. Influence isn't always loud or grand. It's in the small things we do, the presence we carry." Daniel frowned slightly, not sure how to respond. "Influence." The man smiled again. "Yes, influence. We all have it. Whether we realize it or not, our words and actions shape the world around us." The conversation lingered in Daniel's mind long after he left the park. Influence. It sounded poetic but unrealistic. He was just one person in a city of millions, what could he possibly influence? Yet the next morning, he found himself looking forward to that park bench. The old man was there again, tossing breadcrumbs to the pigeons, as though he'd been waiting. "Back again," the man said cheerfully. "I was beginning to think I scared you off." Daniel smiled faintly. "Not a chance. I guess I needed some fresh air." "I'm glad," the man said. Fresh air and fresh thoughts often come together. They talked more that day. The old man's name was Mr. Parker, a retired teacher who had spent 40 years shaping young minds. He spoke with an ease that made even silence feel meaningful. He told Daniel about his students, the ones who had struggled, the ones who had thrived, and the ones who had taught him lessons he'd never expected to learn. Daniel began visiting the park regularly, sometimes even arriving early just to talk with him. Their conversations became a quiet ritual. Mr. Parker never lectured, he guided gently, through stories and questions that made Daniel think about his choices, his past, and his purpose. One crisp morning, Daniel confessed, "I used to want to be an architect. I wanted to build something that would last. But life, it didn't go that way." Mr. Parker leaned back, his eyes kind but sharp. "Who says it can't still go that way? The road's still there, Daniel. You just stopped walking. Daniel looked down. It's not that simple. It never is, Mr. Parker said softly. But simplicity isn't the goal. Meaning is. You can build buildings or you can build people, both are acts of creation. Both require vision. He pointed toward the fountain nearby. The water flowed gracefully, spilling from one tier to the next, catching the morning light. See that? He said. Every drop falls, yet together, they create beauty. That's what influence is like. You may not see the result right away, but it flows, connecting everything it touches. Daniel watched the water, mesmerized by the rhythm of its fall. Something about those words touched a part of him he had buried long ago. That evening, on his way home, he kept hearing Mr. Parker's words echoing in his head. Influence flows. He wondered if he had ever influenced anyone in his monotonous life. Maybe not through grand gestures, but perhaps through moments he never noticed, the small kindnesses, the quiet patience with customers, the times he had offered someone a smile when they seemed down. A week later, as he worked a late shift, Daniel's understanding of influence was tested in a way he never expected. A teenager walked into the store, his hands trembling inside the pocket of his hoodie. There was fear in his eyes, the kind that came from desperation. Daniel noticed the glint of a knife as the boy pulled it halfway out. "Empty the register," the boy stammered. Daniel's pulse raced, but something inside him stilled. He remembered Mr. Parker's calm voice. Influence isn't about power. It's about presence. He raised his hands slowly. Hey, you look scared. Are you okay?" The boy blinked, confused by the unexpected response. "Just give me the money." "You don't have to do this," Daniel said softly. "You're not a bad person. You're just in a bad place. I've been there." The boy's voice cracked. "You don't understand." Daniel stepped a little closer, his tone steady. "Maybe not everything. But I do know that this moment doesn't have to define you. Put the knife down. We'll figure it out together." There was a long pause. Then the boy's shoulders slumped, tears filling his eyes. He dropped the knife and buried his face in his hands. Daniel exhaled shakily, walked around the counter, and handed him a sandwich from the shelf. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a meal in days." The boy nodded silently, taking the food with trembling hands. Later, when the police arrived, called by a customer who had seen the commotion, Daniel explained the situation. They took the boy gently, promising to contact his family. Before leaving, the boy looked back and whispered, "Thank you." That night, sitting alone in his apartment, Daniel finally understood what Mr. Parker meant. Influence wasn't about status or wealth. It was about the courage to show compassion when it mattered most. It was about the quiet choices that ripple outward, changing lives without ever demanding recognition. The next morning, Daniel went to the park early. Mr. Parker was there, as always, scattering crumbs for the pigeons. Daniel sat beside him, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "You were right," he said. "Influence flows." Mr. Parker smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "Ah, so you've felt it now." Daniel nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. "Yes, and I think it's time I start building something again, not just buildings but people." Mr. Parker chuckled softly. "Good. That's the truest form of architecture." The fountain gurgled beside them, the sun climbed higher, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt alive. Months rolled into one another, and Daniel's life began to change in ways he had never imagined. The park conversations had stirred something deep within him, a quiet determination that refused to fade. He had quit the convenience store after years of monotony and enrolled in night classes at the community college. It wasn't architecture this time, but social work, something that allowed him to build people, not structures. The days were long, the nights even longer, but every morning he woke up with a sense of purpose he had never known before. During the day, Daniel volunteered at a local youth center, a small, struggling place where kids from broken homes came to escape the streets. The walls were faded, the furniture old, and the funding nearly gone, but to the kids, it was a refuge. And to Daniel, it became a second home. He wasn't a professional counselor yet, but he listened, and somehow, that was enough. It was there he saw a familiar face one afternoon, a face that froze him in his tracks. The teenager from the night of the attempted robbery stood in the doorway, looking awkward and uncertain. "Eli," Daniel said, blinking in surprise. The boy's head shot up. His eyes, once hard with fear, were softer now, though still wary. "Hey," he muttered. "Didn't think you'd remember me." "How could I not?" Daniel said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "What are you doing here?" "They put me in this outreach program," Eli replied. "Part of my probation thing. I come here after school. Supposed to help me, get my life together." Daniel nodded, his heart tightening. "Then you came to the right place." From that day, Eli began showing up regularly. At first, he was quiet, keeping to himself, sitting in the corner during group sessions. But Daniel didn't push him. He just made sure Eli always felt seen, a nod, a kind word, an occasional joke. Slowly, the boy opened up. He told Daniel about his mother's illness, his father's disappearance, and how he had been trying to survive in a neighborhood that ate hope for breakfast. One afternoon, after a mentorship session, Eli lingered behind while the other kids left. He shifted nervously, running a hand through his hair. "Mr. Reed," he began, hesitant. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course," Daniel said, setting down his clipboard. Eli's voice cracked a little. "I got accepted into the community college program. Full scholarship. They said it's because of my grades and the work I've done here." For a second, Daniel just stared at him, stunned. Then a slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Eli, that's incredible. You earned that. You worked for it." Eli looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't think I'd ever go back to school. I thought my life was over that night at the store. But you," he hesitated, his voice trembling slightly. "You didn't treat me like a criminal. You treated me like I still mattered. I never forgot that." Daniel felt a lump rise in his throat. "Everyone deserves a chance to start over," he said quietly. "You just needed someone to remind you that you could." Eli smiled shyly. "You sound like that old guy you talked to in the park." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You know about him?" "Yeah," Eli said. "I see you there sometimes when I'm walking home. I started talking to him too, you know. He's different. Makes you think about stuff you didn't know you needed to think about. He said you were one of his best students." Daniel chuckled softly, though his chest tightened with emotion. "Yeah, he's a good man. The best I've ever met." A few weeks later, Daniel decided to tell Mr. Parker about Eli's progress. He picked up a small bouquet of wildflowers from a street vendor and walked toward the park with a sense of excitement. It had been a while since they'd talked. His classes and work had kept him busy. As he neared the familiar fountain, a strange stillness filled the air. The bench where Mr. Parker always sat was empty. Only a folded newspaper lay there, weighed down by a stone. Daniel frowned and picked it up. His breath caught as he read the headline, "Beloved teacher and mentor Arthur Parker passes peacefully in his sleep at 78. The words blurred as his eyes filled with tears. He sank onto the bench, the newspaper trembling in his hands. The city moved around him, footsteps, laughter, car horns, but he heard none of it. For a long time, he just sat there, staring at the fountain. The water flowed as it always had, cascading gently over the tears, glistening in the afternoon sun. It felt wrong that something so constant could go on while someone so irreplaceable was gone. He whispered into the wind, "Thank you, Mr. Parker, for believing in me before I did." The pigeons began to gather, as if drawn by the echo of memory. Daniel smiled through his tears and scattered the breadcrumbs he had brought, watching them flutter and feed, their wings catching the sunlight. He remembered Mr. Parker's words, "Influence flows," and realized now that it never truly stops. It simply changes form, passing from one heart to another. From that day forward, Daniel carried Mr. Parker's lessons like a flame. He poured his energy into his studies, eventually earning his degree and taking over as director of the youth center. The place that once struggled for survival became a thriving hub of hope. He started mentorship programs, workshops, and scholarships for underprivileged teens, many of them kids who reminded him of the boy with the trembling hands and the knife. Years passed, and the center grew. The walls that had once been dull were now covered with murals painted by the kids themselves, bright colors, messages of resilience, hands reaching toward the sky. Every success story felt like a ripple of the influence Mr. Parker had started. One spring morning, Daniel stood in the park again, surrounded by a group of volunteers. The old wooden bench had been replaced with a new one, a small brass plaque attached to it. He ran his fingers over the engraved words. In loving memory of Arthur Parker, a teacher whose kindness changed countless lives. He sat down and looked at the young volunteers gathered around him, students, mentors, dreamers. Many of them had their own stories of struggle and change. He began to speak softly, his voice carrying over the hum of the park. Influence, he said, isn't about power or control. It's about presence, about showing up for people when they need it most. The smallest word of encouragement can light a spark that changes someone's entire life. I'm standing here because someone once believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. The volunteers listened intently. One young man raised his hand and asked, "Do you ever think Mr. Parker knew what kind of difference he made?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I think he did. But even if he didn't, the beauty of influence is that it doesn't need recognition. It lives on in the lives it touches, and in the people who keep it moving forward." A breeze rustled through the trees, scattering a few leaves into the fountain. Daniel tilted his head, almost as if he could hear a voice carried in the wind, calm, wise, and familiar. "Keep building, Daniel. Keep building." He smiled to himself, feeling the warmth of that invisible presence beside him. Then he turned to the group and said, "Come on. Let's get back to work. We've got a lot of lives to build." As they walked away, the pigeons descended on the bench, pecking at invisible crumbs, their wings fluttering in the golden light. And though the bench was empty, Daniel knew it never truly would be. Influence, after all, never ends, it simply finds new hands to carry it forward.